Jim Jordan has built much of his reputation in Congress on his ability to be combative. He has a sharp tone, a style that leans more on pressure than precision, and a reputation for being one of the most relentless questioners in the room. But what often becomes clear is that while he has mastered the art of rhetoric, he doesn't have the grounding in legal expertise that can back up his arguments in technical debates. This gap between presentation and substance was laid bare during his exchange with Jasmine Crockett. Jordan, like many lawmakers who haven't spent time in a courtroom, tends to lean on broad, simplified interpretations of legal standards. His goal is often not to make a strictly accurate legal case, but to frame an issue in a way that sounds compelling to his audience, that works in the context of political theater, where soundbites and sharp accusations tend to dominate headlines. Yet, when the subject matter becomes rooted in statutory interpretation or the finer points of precedent, the limits of that approach show asterisk during the hearing. Jordan was pushing a line of questioning that leaned on a misstatement of the law. It was not unusual for him. He frequently presses witnesses with loaded phrasing, suggesting that their actions violate certain standards. But this time, the subject required more than bravado. Crockett, who had spent years practicing law in Texas, recognized the inaccuracy immediately. Instead of matching Jordan's intensity, she took the moment to calmly dismantle the foundation of his argument. Jordan tried to double down, pressing with interruptions and rhetorical flourishes, but that only made the contrast sharper. He was working from the perspective of a politician trying to win an exchange, while Crockett was approaching it like a lawyer correcting the record. Her authority came not just from her position but from lived professional experience. For her, statutes and legal standards weren't abstract, they were tools she had worked with daily. For Jordan, they were more like props to serve his argument. This difference matters because congressional hearings are not just about scoring points in the moment, they become part of the permanent record. When a representative misstates the law and it is corrected on the spot by someone with clear expertise, that correction carries weight far beyond the hearing room. Crockett's.com clarification put Jordan in an unusual position. His usual weapon confidence wasn't enough to protect him. Once the misstatement was exposed, silence was his only option. Jordan's lack of legal training is not necessarily surprising. Many lawmakers in Congress are not attorneys, but what stood out in this particular exchange was how much his style depends on bluster, and how quickly that style falters when someone in the room has the credentials to expose the gaps. He is skilled at generating attention, and his lines often get repeated in partisan media, but Crockett's response showed that attention is fragile when built on shaky ground. Once she laid out the actual statute and explained how precedent worked, his line of questioning collapsed under its own weight. This was not a case of Jordan simply making a small mistake. It was a deeper reflection of how he approaches his role. For him, hearings are often opportunities to create a spectacle, to be the loudest voice, pressing the hardest. For Crockett, the hearing was an opportunity to apply legal reasoning and ensure accuracy. That clash of priorities, political theater against legal expertise, was why the moment felt so stark. Jordan was exposed not just for a single misstep, but for the broader weakness in his approach. Jordan's influence within his party has never relied on legal nuance, and perhaps that is why he rarely adjusts. But Crockett's correction made clear that rhetoric can only go so far before it collides with fact. The hearing highlighted something his critics have said for years. Jordan knows how to argue, but he doesn't always know what he's arguing about when it comes to technical legal issues. When Jim Jordan enters a hearing room, there is an expectation of conflict. His style is built around forcefulness, a quick pace, and the repetition of points until they land like jabs in a boxing match. Many of his colleagues, even those who disagree with him, will admit that his energy often dominates the space. But what unfolded when Jasmine Crockett chose to speak showed a very different kind of power, one that didn't require raised voices or aggressive posturing. Her response was measured, deliberate, and carefully restrained. And that approach was exactly what made it so effective against Jordan's usual strategy. Jordan had been pressing a point with his familiar rhythm, rapid, insistent, and with an air of certainty. He thrives on momentum, often not pausing long enough for his opponents to lay out a counterpoint before moving on to the next accusation. In many instances, this rhythm forces the person on the receiving end to stumble, leaving Jordan with the upper hand, but Crockett refused to enter the exchange on those terms. Instead of speeding up to match his pace, she slowed down. Her words were not rushed, and she didn't allow herself to be dragged into his cadence. That decision shifted control of the moment in her favor. Measured responses in a heated environment carry their own kind of weight. When Crockett began to speak, she didn't raise her volume to overpower Jordan's. Instead, she calmly requested recognition, waited until she had the floor, and then spoke with a steady confidence. Her tone conveyed not only that she understood the legal issues being debated, but also that she didn't need to rely on theatrics to make her point. In a room where Jordan's voice often dominates, Her restraint drew more attention precisely because it contrasted so sharply with his intensity. Jordan attempted to interrupt, as he has done countless times with others, but the dynamic was different here. The interruptions only made his frustration more visible, while Crockett's refusal to engage on that level highlighted his lack of control. By sticking to her pace, she forced Jordan to either sit in silence or risk looking like he was trying to shout down someone who clearly knew what she was talking about. It was an inversion of the power structure he usually relies on. Her measured response also revealed something about Jordan's strategy. His approach often depends on rattling his opponent, pushing them to react emotionally or defensively. Once they are off balance, he seizes the opportunity to frame the narrative. But Crockett didn't give him that opening. By staying calm, she denied him the emotional reaction he thrives on. Instead, she continued with her explanation, grounding her statements in fact and law. That composure made Jordan's attempts to escalate look less like strength and more like desperation. The effectiveness of Crockett's calm delivery also comes from the way it plays with audiences beyond the room. Viewers watching the exchange could clearly see the difference. One lawmaker leaning heavily on bluster, the other refusing to be drawn into the noise, and instead relying on substance. For those already skeptical of Jordan's methods, the moment confirmed their doubts. For others who may not have been familiar with Crockett, it was an introduction to her style, firm without being theatrical, assertive without being combative. Jordan has made a career out of dominating hearings through sheer volume and persistence, but that strategy has its limits. When someone like Crockett enters the space with a background in law and the discipline to stay focused, the balance shifts. Measured responses become more than just a stylistic choice. They become a tool to expose the weaknesses in Jordan's approach. His intensity, which often overwhelms less prepared opponents, suddenly looked less impressive when met with quiet confidence and steady correction. What stood out most was how little Crockett had to do to make her point resonate. She didn't need to match Jordan's energy or meet his interruptions with raised volume. By maintaining control of her tone, she demonstrated that authority in these exchanges doesn't come from who talks the loudest, but from who commands attention through substance. The contrast between her restraint and his aggression told the story more clearly than any headline could. It was not about who had the last word, but about who made their words matter. Jordan has long relied on public perception as one of his strongest tools. His style is built for the cameras, for clips that circulate quickly on television and social media, showcasing him as a forceful voice who won't back down. He speaks with conviction, frames his questions in ways that sound authoritative, and often leaves the impression that he has cornered his opponent, even when the details behind his claims may not hold up. For Jordan, winning in the court of public opinion has often mattered just as much, if not more, than winning in the realm of fact. But in this exchange with Jasmine Crockett, the perception shifted, and the shift came not because she matched his energy, but because she grounded herself in clarity and accuracy that cut through his usual bluster. The way hearings are broadcast means that moments can be clipped and shared far beyond the committee room. Jordan understands this well, which is why he leans into dramatic gestures and fast-paced questioning. His strategy is designed to look powerful in short bursts. Crockett's.com correction, however, demonstrated that perception can turn just as quickly when the audience sees a contrast between performance and substance. When she laid out the actual legal standard and explained, in plain language, where Jordan's statement had been misleading, the viewers weren't just hearing words, they were witnessing a complete reversal of the dynamic Jordan had tried to set up. Jordan's silence in the aftermath mattered more than anything he said before it. For a politician who thrives on appearing in control, even a moment of visible frustration or inability to respond is powerful. Crockett didn't need to point out that he was flustered. The cameras caught it, and audiences recognized it for themselves. Public perception is often shaped less by what is said, and more by how it is delivered and received. Here, Jordan's posture shifted, his interruptions tapered off, and his usual dominance slipped. To viewers, that was unmistakable. Crockett's advantage was not only that she had the legal expertise, but also that she communicated it in a way that was accessible. Many lawmakers with professional backgrounds sometimes lean on jargon that loses the audience. Crockett avoided that. She explained the statute clearly, in terms that anyone watching could follow. By doing so, she ensured that her correction of Jordan wasn't just technically accurate, it was also persuasive to the public. In politics, persuasion is where perception becomes reality. Jordan's critics have often argued that his arguments lack depth, and supporters have admired him for his relentlessness. But this exchange showed how the same qualities that make him effective in some contexts can turn into liabilities when exposed. To viewers, his interruptions looked less like strength and more like avoidance. His reliance on volume and repetition, without a factual backbone, came across as hollow when compared to Crockett's straightforward delivery. The perception was that he had been checked, not by someone louder or angrier, but by someone who was simply better prepared. The broader audience takeaway also included something about temperament. Jordan is known for being combative, often raising his voice and pressing until he dominates the exchange. Crockett, by contrast, remained steady throughout. That contrast created a perception not only of Jordan being outmatched in substance but also in composure. In political theater, demeanor can be as important as argument. When one side looks rattled and the other appears in control, it shapes how the public interprets who won the exchange. This moment reminded viewers that substance can carry more weight than spectacle. For those who had grown accustomed to Jordan's approach, seeing him effectively neutralized by someone who didn't raise her voice was striking. It wasn't about theatrics, it was about authority, and Crockett projected it without effort. The perception of Jordan as an unstoppable force in hearings took a hit, replaced, at least in this instance, by the image of him being silenced by accuracy. Jordan will no doubt continue to rely on his preferred tactics, because they have served him in energizing his base. But for audiences beyond that base, Crockett's.com dismantling of his misstatements revealed something they don't often see. That bluster collapses when faced with precision. Public perception turned in her favor not because she outperformed him in spectacle, but because she showed that substance can silence even the loudest voice in the room. Jim Jordan has been a central figure in the Republican Party for years, known for his relentless questioning, combative tone, and willingness to dive headfirst into heated debates. He thrives in moments of confrontation, using his platform to rally supporters and portray himself as a defender of conservative causes. Yet, in this particular exchange, it was Jasmine Crockett who emerged as the voice that lingered in people's minds. For her, the moment wasn't just about correcting Jordan, it was about establishing herself as a serious presence in Congress. Someone capable of standing toe-to-toe with one of the GOP's most aggressive lawmakers and holding her ground with poise and authority. Crockett is relatively new to Capitol Hill compared to Jordan, but her background as a practicing attorney gave her an advantage that went beyond political experience. Where Jordan leaned on sharp rhetoric, she leaned on expertise. That distinction matters because it framed her not only as a challenger in the moment, but also as a lawmaker with the capacity to influence future debates in a meaningful way. The exchange became more than a clash between two representatives. It became an introduction for many Americans to a rising voice who could cut through noise with knowledge and composure. Jordan is often used as a benchmark in political debates because of his stature within the Republican Party. Facing him means facing someone who rarely yields, someone who prides himself on being able to corner his opponents. For Crockett to not only hold her own but also silence him, even briefly, elevated her in the eyes of both colleagues and viewers. It signaled that she wasn't simply participating in the discussion, she was shaping it. Emerging lawmakers rarely get moments that clearly define their presence on the national stage, but this exchange gave her one asterisk. Her approach was particularly striking because it didn't attempt to mimic Jordan's. Too often, opponents of Jordan try to match his energy, meeting his forcefulness with more of the same. That path usually plays into his strengths, since he thrives on turning discussions into shouting matches. Crockett avoided that trap entirely. By staying calm, speaking steadily, and refusing to be baited into unnecessary escalation, she created a contrast that was as clear as it was effective. Her restraint highlighted her maturity, while his interruptions underscored his lack of control in the moment. To the audience, it was clear who was in command of the exchange. For Jordan. The encounter was a rare moment of silence, but for Crockett, it was the beginning of something larger. Her ability to step into the spotlight and correct one of the most dominant voices in the chamber signaled that she had the tools to become more than just another member of the committee. She was asserting herself as someone who could shift conversations and force even seasoned politicians to take notice. That kind of presence is how reputations in Washington are built, not through years of waiting quietly, but through seizing opportunities when they come. What makes her emergence even more significant is the context of public viewership. Congressional hearings are often less about persuading colleagues in the room and more about shaping narratives for the public watching at home. When Crockett corrected Jordan, and did so with clarity, she wasn't only addressing the committee, she was speaking to an audience far wider than those seated in the chamber. For many watching, this was their first real impression of her, and impressions formed in such moments tend to last. She came across as competent, unshaken, and authoritative. While Jordan looked diminished by comparison, Jordan has long benefited from being the loudest person in the room, but Crockett showed that being the clearest person in the room can be even more powerful. That lesson wasn't just about this one encounter. It was about the future role she might play in congressional debates. If she continues to use her legal expertise to highlight inaccuracies and present information calmly, she could quickly become one of the most respected voices in the chamber. Jordan's presence in the exchange gave the moment weight, but it was Crockett's ability to rise above his style that gave the moment staying power. For her, silencing Jim Jordan wasn't just a victory in a single hearing. It was a signal that she has arrived as a force to be reckoned with, someone who can turn her training and temperament into influence. In the world of congressional politics, where emerging voices can be drowned out by established figures, Crockett carved out space for herself, and she did it in a way that will be remembered long after the hearing itself fades. From the news cycle, As the dust settled from the exchange between Jim Jordan and Jasmine Crockett, what lingered wasn't just the details of their argument, but the impression it left behind. In the halls of Congress, moments come and go, hearings begin and end, and countless debates are held that fade quickly from public memory. But every so often, an interaction captures something deeper about the people involved and the balance of power at play. This was one of those moments. Asterisk for Jim Jordan, the silence spoke volumes. Known for his relentless approach, his refusal to yield, and his tendency to overpower opponents with sheer volume, he found himself momentarily checked by someone who refused to play by his rules. Crockett didn't need to be louder, faster, or more forceful. She simply had to be steady, clear, and correct. In that silence, the contrast between style and substance became plain for everyone watching. Jordan may continue to command influence in his party, but this hearing showed the limits of his approach when confronted by someone unwilling to be swept away by his bluster. Asterisk. For Jasmine Crockett, the moment was more than a correction, it was a declaration. In a space where new lawmakers often struggle to make their voices heard, she demonstrated that presence doesn't require volume. Authority doesn't always come from years of seniority. Sometimes it comes from preparation, discipline, and the courage to speak with conviction when the opportunity presents itself. Crockett showed that she wasn't there to be overshadowed or intimidated. She was there to contribute, to challenge, and to ensure accuracy in a process that demands it. Asterisk. The broader message of the exchange is a reminder of what political discourse can and should be. Too often, congressional hearings devolve into theater, designed to generate clips rather than clarity. Jordan has mastered that art, but Crockett reminded everyone that theater without substance can collapse under scrutiny. Her correction reinforced that truth and showed audiences that facts still matter, even in spaces where spectacle usually takes center stage. Asterisk. What makes the moment even more striking is how it resonated beyond the hearing room. Viewers saw two very different approaches, one reliant on pressure and speed, the other on composure and precision. They saw one figure growing visibly frustrated, while the other grew more commanding as she spoke. That contrast became the story. And in politics, the story is often more powerful than the argument itself. Asterisk. Ultimately, the exchange highlighted a shift that may continue to unfold in Congress. Established figures like Jordan will always dominate headlines through their confrontational styles, but emerging voices like Crockett's prove that there is another way to command attention, not through noise, but through knowledge, not through volume, but through credibility. It was a clash of methods, and in this case, the quieter voice carried farther. Asterisk. In a time when politics often rewards the loudest participant, Jasmine Crockett demonstrated the power of calm authority. For Jim Jordan, the moment was an uncharacteristic pause. For Crockett, it was the beginning of something larger, sign that her voice, measured and firm, will continue to shape